Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this video is a history of all things Zombicide, followed by my personal preferences and why at the end of it. And that's because I've had this question a lot over the past few weeks, asking me why I prefer Marvel Zombies. I've made it very clear that Marvel Zombies is currently my preferred Zombicide system, and I'm going to go into why. I've talked about it a little bit, but I'll go more into detail here. I've also had a lot of questions asking about the different Zombicide systems. What's different between one or another, past, of course, the obvious theme. And I'll go into that as well. Now, I have done some of this to some degree 4 months ago-ish, whenever we first found out about Marvel Zombies, but back then I hadn't played Marvel Zombies, and also that wasn't really the point of the video, so it was much higher level. This one will be more in-depth. Now, before we go into this whole thing, and timestamps down below for everything, we're going to start off with a brief description of what Zombicide is, for those who don't really know or have a good feeling of the game. Some of us who are watching this video, or me, myself, I know what's going on with Marvel Zombies. I know what's going on with the Zombicide system, and so it's easy to forget that for some people, it's still just a bunch of plastic miniatures on the table, and very often is a representation of, just miniature porn, and people who like rolling dice and hate good games, and once upon a time, I thought that as well before I started playing Zombicide. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to move into a history of Zombicide, how things have evolved over the past 10 years, and it has been 10 years. This thing started in 2012 and it's still going strong, raising millions and millions of dollars. I don't know how many backers there are because I can count up the individual campaigns, but I don't know how much overlap there is. But if I had to guess, I'd say we're probably closing in on 100,000 people, if not more, who have tried out the Zombicide systems just on Kickstarter, if that's forgetting retail. There's a lot going on here. And then finally, at the end, I will cover why Marvel Zombies has become my favorite Zombicide, when until now, Black Plague has been my favorite and has stayed my favorite across every new iteration I have tried. So, let's go into it, starting off with what is Zombicide. Zombicide is effectively it's often referred to as a beer and pretzels game, and it is to a degree, but I think there's a lot of strategy behind it too, and we'll talk about that as well. But the general core concept is you're going to have a bunch of survivors, often referred to as survivors, and you're trying to, as you might imagine, survive. You have a variety of characters. The original Zombicides all start off with 6, so you have 6 characters in play, and then you're going to have the enemies. You're going to have the enemies that are going to be trying to eat you because they're zombies. And so you are going to be spending actions. For the most part, it's going to be spending 3 actions per character until you level up. And you're going to use those actions to do things like moving around the board, to opening doors, to using your weapons, to using various actions, to throwing down, various explosives and Molotov cocktails to explode the enemies, to just using your weapon and rolling dice, trading with other survivors. You're just taking your action economy. So you're going to have 3 actions. You might go move, move, open door. You might go move, move, attack. You might attack, move, move. A whole bunch of variety of ways you can sequence your actions together. But then as you play the game, you are leveling up. You are gaining experience. You are getting more powerful. You are unlocking more skills. But then, so are the enemies. One of the things that has remained true across all Zombicide systems, I'm pretty sure, across all Zombicide systems until now, is the idea that as you have a character who hits a certain threshold, the enemies level up with you. And so there's this constant balance of staying together, of leveling up together, because if I become stronger, and all the enemies do, but you're all still weaker, and we're playing a cooperative experience, that's not good for us. And so you're trying to balance leveling up together so you can be more powerful together to face the oncoming horde together. The game will have that progressive escalation as you all get more powerful, as you're rolling a handful of dice, taking out hordes of zombies and whatever mechanism, guns, swords, whatever's going on in the theme or genre you're playing in, as the zombies get more powerful and try to kill you, and then somewhere along the way, eventually someone wins. Either you get overrun, which is amazing to see it happen. You can have characters like Athena from, not Athena, whatever her name is, can't remember, what's her name? Xena, the warrior princess. That's not actually her name, but that's the character she is. And she'll be rolling tons of dice and destroying anything she can, but she too can be overwhelmed with zombies. And it's fun to see it happen. It's fun to see her dragged down, kicking and screaming as the other survivors limp their way towards the exit, assuming you're playing a game where survivor death is allowed. The game offers a lot of simple fun in the sense of rolling dice and having things happen for you, and finding weapons, finding that new cool weapon that will help you get what you need done. But it also is, to some degree, because of this, it is often referred to as a beer and pretzels game. The idea that you're just rolling dice, you're just in it for the miniature porn, and it is very, very pretty, but that there's no real sense of strategy. It's just, come on, constantly marketing the same thing again and again to a bunch of people who just want their plastic and don't care about good games. But I think there's a lot of strategy in Zombicide at the same time. It's fun. It's definitely something that it lends itself more to the aspect of, I'm not here to play my heavy Euro tonight, I'm here to play Zombicide. But is there strategy? 100%. Is there tactics? 100%. There is a reason why my favorite Zombicides to date have been the ones where it's actually hard, where you actually die as often or more often than when you win. And it's because, yes, I do want that beer and pretzels fun aspect, but I also want that strategy of knowing when to open a door, of knowing how to work together, of knowing when to split away from the party, of knowing when to stick together, of all those different risks and challenges and pushing your luck in the game system. I like Zombicide for a reason, and I'm saying this as somebody who ignored Zombicide for the first 4-5 years. Well, Zombicide started in 2012, and Black Plague came out in 2015, and I was 2 years late to that bandwagon. So yeah, for the first 5 years, I probably just started playing Zombicide in roughly 2017, 2018, and until then, I had ignored the system. I knew it existed, and I just didn't care. I wasn't in it for a gigantic game overwrought with miniatures. That wasn't my thing. Until one day it became my thing, but it wasn't always that way. And that's a bit of a background on what Zombicide is. From there, let's start with the history. 2012. The first Zombicide came out. Now, my knowledge of the first 3 Zombicide systems is going to be a little more sparse because I haven't played them, well, I played one of them once back in the day, and I haven't really dived into them at all past that. And so both the age aspect of it, as well as my lack of familiarity, means I have the least knowledge there as far as what's changed or iterated. But 2012, the first Zombicide came out on Kickstarter, 5,258 backers, $781,000 raised, and this game is often associated with popularizing what Kickstarter has become. I think there are 2 games that are often associated, Alien Frontiers and then Zombicide, in different ways. Alien Frontiers, I think, was the first one, the first big Kickstarter, and by big, I think it raised like $50,000, but back then, it was this interesting concept of kickstarting board games that was becoming new. And then Zombicide popularized it with this aspect of stretch goals, the slow unlocks, the look, our funding goal is rising, and look how much stuff we're just going to throw at you, which has remained true, despite people complaining about how much stuff is being thrown at them. But anyway, Zombicide, 2012, a whole bunch of stuff, it popularized the stretch goal system, and it introduced the concept of what Zombicide is. Then in 2013, Zombicide 2nd Edition, Zombicide 2, not 2nd Edition, Zombicide 2 Prison Outbreak came out, 8,944 backers, $2,255,000 raised. A massive escalation over the first one, although it's interesting to note, the backer number didn't even double. It went from 5,000 backers to 8,000 backers, or 9,000 backers, but the funding went from $781,000 to $2.25 million. That is a significant jump in the funding goal relative to the amount of backers, and that multiplication is likely interesting to do across all of these, although I haven't actually done the math on all of them. But yeah, that Zombicide 2nd Edition, 2013, a year later, the hype of the first one had landed, and we saw that second Kickstarter come, and people jumped in on that. Then we had Zombicide Season 3, Morgue. 2014, 12,000 backers, $2,849,000. Again, an escalation in the backer number. We're still seeing those rise. The funding total rising as well. The system, Zombicide 2nd Edition and Zombicide 3rd Edition, did have minor iterations of the first one, small adjustments to the rules, but nothing significant. They introduced new zombie types, new stuff like that. They had small cleanups or adjustments to the spawn rules or small details that you could be playing one or the other and not have a significant impact. They were a continuation of the system, adding more content, more stuff, giving you a shared universe for those who loved Zombicide. And then 2015, they came back for their 4th game. Again, they're coming out with 1 a year on average. There's an occasional missed year, but because they don't do it month to month, but they're basically trending at 1 a year, and that has remained true. Zombicide Black Plague comes out in 2015, 20,000 backers. Up from 12,000 backers, we have 20,915 backers, $4,079,000 raised. It's absolutely insane. And this is the first time we saw both a new theme. A completely new theme here. People who were expecting more Zombicide suddenly got hit with a new genre, a new thing. And this is going to be true across all these Zombicide games, which is the first point of interest for you should be the theme. The theme should call to you to some degree. If you prefer one theme versus another, that absolutely should be a factor. It should not be the only factor, but it should be a factor in which Zombicide system you pick. I like Marvel. I like superheroes. Some people don't. Some people like cowboys. Some people like 2nd Edition. Invader, Black Plague. There are a lot of good Zombicide games out there. Now, Black Plague introduced a few things that were new. The first thing is it introduced the removal of friendly fire, which is something that people have complained about for a long time. The idea that your misses on zombies automatically hit your teammates, no one really liked that concept, and it was a constant frustration. It's like, I get it that I might miss. I get that. I'll shoot into a crowd. I might miss. That's fine. But why do I automatically hit my teammate? And so they removed that concept now. It's not nearly as like the concept of immediately hitting your teammate first, of having your shots hit them. I think I may have gotten it wrong there. It's not that it misses hit your teammates, it's that you automatically hit your teammates first. But they removed that concept of friendly fire in the original Zombicides, which is a big point of contention. They also added necromancers. We suddenly have this new mechanic of a necromancer that showed up in Black Plague and slowly marched towards an exit, and would potentially increase the number of spawn points on the board if you couldn't take it out. So it introduced this new pressure point of something else that you have to deal with as the game system is developing. It also saw a large component upgrade. This is the first time we went from the original Zombicide games. If you see the original Zombicides, they basically have sheets of paper with little sliding things on them, chits or whatever you want to call them. They're not great component quality. And Zombicide 2nd Edition, Zombicide Black Plague, saw a big jump in the dashboards that were offered, and the tokens that were offered, and even in the quality of the miniature sculpts. The original Zombicide games all had solid miniatures, but I think Black Plague put them to shame in the quality that Black Plague brought to the table. It also removed the degree of color that all the survivors had. Survivors in the original Zombicide systems had just a lot of color going on, and Black Plague streamlined it, giving you a color for the good guys, color for the bad guys, and then potentially colors for different enemies as it iterated, but less colorific and all over the place. I think on multiple accounts, Black Plague was a success, and to this day, there's a strong argument to be made that Black Plague is the most successful Zombicide system we've seen to date. It has the best miniatures. It started with some of the best miniatures. It doesn't necessarily have them, but it started with some of the better quality miniatures, introducing a new age of command quality. It added more plastic to the boards and other things that are not just miniatures, but add to the quality of life. It streamlined the rules, and it added a theme that people really enjoyed, and a system of rules, and an absolute ton of variety in the enemies. Although, to be fair to the first three, we saw a lot of variety in the enemies in the first three iterations as well. Then in 2017, kind of a semi-year gap over here. 2017, we skipped 2016, we saw Zombicide Green Horde hit the table. And this one has been the most successful Zombicide to date, as of right now. Zombicide Green Horde, possibly riding off the wave of popularity that Black Plague brought to the table. Green Horde comes back 2017, 27,000 backers, 27,236 backers, an absolute insane number of backers, and the largest we've seen in any Zombicide campaign to date, and $5 million, just over $5 million funded, which has been the most successful to date, but will be beaten by Marvel Zombies shortly. Although the backer number, I think that one's holding strong. Green Horde iterated upon the shared universe that Black Plague introduced. The same way we had seasons 1, 2, and 3, we now had Black Plague and Green Horde. Green Horde didn't add that many changes. It was in the shared universe, so you could combine the game systems, you can combine the survivors, the weapon, the gear, the abominations, all that stuff in the game systems. But it added a few things that were small rule changes or tweaks or adjustments. First of all, it added siege weapons, which is a big concept. It added suddenly these ballistae and trebuchets, whatever it is, all these different catapults or things you can have, these different siege weapons to take down the baddies. It also had various baddies that needed siege weapons to take them down, so it gave you some of those extra level high gigantic baddies over there. It added small rules tweaks in terms of how Zombicide split. Black Plague had this concept that zombies would split in terms of if there was one zombie that could go 2 equal pathways, it would create another zombie in the process and then go down 2 equal pathways. Green Horde said, forget that, just choose a pathway, call it a day, split them as evenly as possible, but that extra one won't create a new one. Not necessarily an issue of rules or difficulty, not necessarily an issue of difficulty, more an issue of just rules, of just how the rules play out and making it as simple as possible. It also added orcs being more punishing, the idea that orcs would deal 2 wounds in a shot, giving you less room for actually making mistakes in the game. So suddenly you had these new enemies that were just more powerful in the damage they were dealing to you. Even the basic walkers were now a threat to a level that the original walkers hadn't been. And then finally it added this horde mechanic, this idea that you had this slow piling up horde of characters that as you drew spawn cards, some of them were just sitting on this horde pile. And then as you draw the wrong spawn card, they suddenly flood into the board. There are many aspects of what Green Plague... Oh, and one more thing it added. It also added hedges and spikes, or whatever it is. Hedges and 2 different terrain effects that changed the way the game state worked. Now, I liked a lot of things that Green Horde did. I didn't mind the difficulty. I liked the siege weapons. I liked the increased monsters. I didn't really care either way about the zombie splitting. I liked the horde mechanic. I liked all of that. I did find that the one thing that Green Horde did that I did not love, and it's a reason why Black Plague has remained my favorite over Green Horde, and why I primarily keep Green Horde because of the fact that I can integrate different things between the 2 systems, is the hedge concept. You have these concept of hedges, of line of sight past hedges, of being able to move through hedges, but not having line of sight. It's a clever and interesting concept, but I found it often bogged down the movement system of the game. While mechanically it added depth to the game, it also just added unnecessary amounts of just fiddling with stuff and trying to figure out how things are moving, where they're moving, and other aspects that I just didn't find as streamlined as what I want of the system. And that's an interesting complaint for me, because generally I don't like the streamlined stuff that Zombicide has done. I like it when they give me the messiness that's going on. In the case of the hedges, I don't like the hedges. Other than that, Green Horde is a solid addition, and it remains, well, underneath Black Plague as far as my preference for it. Then in 2018, we saw Zombicide Invader. this second world, and people potentially had thoughts and opinions. You know, we saw 3 seasons of the first Zombicide. Maybe we're going to see 3 seasons of Medieval Zombicide, but it was not to be. We saw 2 seasons of Medieval Zombicide, Black Plague and Green Horde. Then we switched to Zombicide in Space. We see Zombicide Invader with in 2018 with 18,486 backers, a significant drop from the 27,000 we saw for Zombicide Green Horde, and the $3,352,000 raised, which is also an interesting drop, especially when you consider that they basically put their 2 games in one. Now, I have to imagine this was planned. I don't imagine it was like off-the-cuff desperation. That would be way too much, but they basically dumped 2 full systems. They have Invader and they have Darkside. They still have expansions. They have Black Ops and other small packs that you can mix in, but they had Invader and Darkside all together in a single campaign. The same way you have Black Plague and Green Horde, you have Invader and Darkside, but this time it's coming to you all at once, and it still didn't outperform or even come close to it. Now, don't get me wrong, 18,000 backers and $3.5 million is nothing to scoff at, but it certainly was the first time we saw a step downwards. Until now, every Zombicide system had increased in its price and its popularity and just the general idea of how many people were interested in what was going on here, and Zombicide Invader, while popular, was certainly less popular. And introduced a few new concepts. It introduced the concept of you have different survivors, types, and classes in the game. Suddenly, for the first time, you had soldiers and citizens. This concept of different survivor classes. That survivor wasn't different in its own right. It was different in its own right, plus it had a class. And this is something we see in Undead or Alive as well, which we'll eventually get to in this long video. It also introduced the concept of focused fire. This idea that the abominations are no longer simply destroyed by a level 3 weapon. Something I haven't talked about in case you're new to Zombicide is you have these big bads that take something else to kill. Often a level 3 weapon which rarely exists, or some modification to a weapon, or just some form of Molotov cocktail or dragon fire or something like that being thrown at them or dealt with some form of explosion, grenade, whatever you want to have it. And Invader still has those options. It has these flamethrowers now, but it also gave you this concept of focused fire, that you can roll dice and focus your fire on a single enemy to outdo the power of your weapon. In theory, a good concept, but one that has not worked for me. It has made the concept of a threatening abomination that is impossible to kill, it has made it into a bit of a joke for me. It has made it so, the joke's probably a bit of a strong word, it's coming from Black Plague and the difficulty that Black Plague brought to the table. I found that Invader, the focused fire, just made it not as much of a challenge to actually survive. Now, I did have a recent gameplay over on Quackalope, and I got a lot of suggestions of how to make it difficult. I'm not going to be diving into those, only because Marvel Zombies makes that unnecessary for me. I just can't have that many Zombicide systems in my personal collection, so Invader is going to be leaving my collection because I just have better Zombicides. It also introduced different rules around doors, the idea of closing doors in a way that until now, in Zombicide, you would open doors, but you would never really close doors. It also introduced the concept of mold. Necromancers were gone now, there were no longer necromancers, but the abominations would leave mold in their wake, and that mold would generate their own spawn points of abominations. For the most part, I think Invader is a solid Zombicide system. The thing that I think broke it for me is the friendly fire aspect, which in theory you could have a discussion, should I just take it out of the game and not utilize it? I don't know. I think that the weapon system in Black Plague, once you have the expansions and the modules and all that, I think it gives you enough reasons to, enough ways to take down an abomination which you otherwise might not have. I think Invader kind of is built around the focus fire, and removing it wouldn't necessarily work as well, although I haven't tested it, so take that with a grain of salt. But Invader's a solid system, but that is what we had until we next had Zombicide Night of the Living Dead. In 2019, we had one of the Zombicide offshoots, and we're going to see another one of these with Zombicide Army of the Dead. I think that's the one that's coming next. But Zombicide Night of the Living Dead took a movie, a franchise, and basically in 2019 we had 6,318 backers, $430,000 raised, and this was meant to be a smaller campaign. This was never going to be competitive to any other Zombicide. While I think Invader was a step backwards, I think Night of the Living Dead is a tangent. It's not really part of the system, and it also did introduce new things. It introduced this idea of almost tower defense. You are a bunch of survivors sitting in a house trying to survive the onslaught. You're not charging around trying to accomplish your objectives. There was a different thematic aspect, and I'm actually compelled by the thematic aspect of it. What I'm not compelled by it is the theme. I don't care for the theme. I never really watched Night of the Living Dead. I don't have any nostalgia for the movie. And then also, I've heard from people who played the game that it was way too easy, a problem I had already started to see with Invader, and is definitely not interested in signing up for something that was considered to be significantly easier than Invader. Then, in 2019, we had Zombicide 2nd Edition. We saw a big jump up from Invader, although still a step down from Green Horde. We have 21,000 backers, 21,735 backers, $3,410,000 raised in Zombicide 2nd Edition. This is their reapproach to the original theme, the original just modern day Zombicide, although now with beautiful dashboards, expansions, better miniatures, all of the stuff that we had gotten used to as far as liking the Zombicide system. And again, introduced some new things. I think for the first time, although maybe the Invader did this, I could be wrong. I can't remember exactly when this started, but somewhere along the pathway, I think it was 2nd edition, they introduced a hard and fixed rule that any survivor dying ends the game. In Black Plague, you had this concept where it depended on the mission. Some missions allowed for it, some missions didn't. And I like the concept of it. I like the concept of a sacrificial survivor allowing the others to escape because they let themselves be overrun by the Horde. It introduced some serious cinematic moments in my gameplay, and I didn't like the removal of it. Not the end of the world, but I liked having that aspect of being able to sacrifice yourself for the team. It also brought back cars. It brought you cars to the table in terms of the car systems of how you can move cars around the board, running over zombies, shooting from the car, doing all of that. It also started campaigns. It started the concept of, I think this is the first campaign we saw in a Zombicide world. Until now, Zombicide had always been a sequence of missions that, while to some extent had some small disconnected narrative, for the most part they were single-shot scenarios. You could play it in any order. You might go through them in order, but there's no carryover. They're just single-shot scenarios. And Zombicide 2nd Edition brought you campaigns, although that, to me, was the worst part of Zombicide 2nd Edition. The concept of the campaign I really liked. And you had these cards that went on the table, you'd go to a scenario, you'd go to a spot on the board, you'd look at the card, you'd flip it over. I liked what the campaign was trying to do. For ourselves, we found that to be completely unbalanced. We found that when we played the campaign, we leveled up so significantly quicker than the enemies were, to the point that it was a literal cakewalk. Zombicide 2nd Edition was not even remotely hard, and made Invader seem like a challenging game. While I liked some of the aspects it had this day-night cycle that was a lot of fun. That was a fun new thing it added. It added the concept of it started the reduction of the amount of zombicide types, zombie types in the game. Black Plague had a ton. The original Zombicides had a ton. Invader had a lot of different zombie types. And 2nd Edition introduced the concept of a daily spawn in their Kickstarters, and they kind of had that as your zombie variety, although I found it to be not fun. It's not fun to have the occasional zombie show up, and you have to be looking at the rules and figuring out, what's the 1,700 rules for this one zombie that I have to remember. I didn't appreciate that. It gave you the rule memory of abominations without the threat of abominations. It was annoying, not a solid thing. I didn't appreciate the daily spawn concept. I like the theory of it, but in practice, just too many rules with not enough impact to those rules to bother dealing with. And so there was a big reduction in the amount of zombie variety in 2nd Edition, although to be fair, you could integrate earlier zombies from earlier sets in terms of the modern could mix with modern. You'd have different quality sculpts, but you could do that if that's something you wanted. But yeah, for me, the campaign was a big letdown in terms of the difficulty, while having a lot of promise in the types of things it was offering that it could do. So potential promise, but ultimately a letdown. Then in 2021, we saw another jump in a year here. 2021 saw Zombicide Undead or Alive. 21,000 backers, 21,160, just under Zombicide 2nd Edition, $3,310,000 raised, again, just under Zombicide 2nd Edition. Zombicide Undead or Alive brought you the Western theme to the table. And again, it introduced a few new things. All Zombicide games have until now. They've always introduced some new things. Zombicide Undead or Alive brought a few differences. First of all, the campaign continued, so that's not a difference. The campaign concept from Zombicide 2nd Edition has continued. I am hopefully optimistic that it will be good. This is an important part to note that Zombicide Undead or Alive is not on my table. I have played it. I played it on TTS when I was running the Kickstarter, but I've only played it one time and have not had a chance to dive into anything else, from expansions to campaign content, so I'm hopeful that the promise I saw from the campaign in 2nd Edition is actually done in a way that is actually threatening. And part of the reason I'm hopeful for that is because Zombicide Undead or Alive is the first time I actually died in a Zombicide game since Black Plague. I have won every game of Invader I've ever played. I have won every game of 2nd Edition I have ever played. I have lose most of my games of I lose a majority of my games of Black Plague and Green Horde. And the one and only game I've played in Undead or Alive, I lost. And that was very, very good. I was very happy that I lost. It also introduced this concept of having 4 survivors. For the first time, Zombicide broke away from having 6 survivors, and now there are 4, which potentially makes it better for your game group. But the tricky part of having 6 survivors in a game is that means Zombicide plays well at 2 and 3 players. Playing as 1 player, I think there are better dungeon crawl experiences. Zombicide's more fun. It's not as strategy and tactical. It does have strategy and tactics, but it's not my preferred solo game. And so for me, Zombicide is a game that works at 2 and 3 players. Because at 2 players, we're controlling 3 survivors each. At 3 players, we're controlling 2 each. At 4 players, it's not pretty math. At 5 players, it's not pretty math. And at 6 players, there's way too much downtime. And so Zombicide Undead or Alive, one of the things that's interesting in and of itself is it does add the variety of player count. This is the first Zombicide game I will be willing to play at 4 players. Now, it does make 3 players a little messier. How do you divide 4 amongst 3? That's a little messier. But playing it at 2 and 4, and possibly even 1, controlling 4 is not as messy as controlling 6. And so I think that that is a big change in and of itself to the Zombicide system. It also switched to the, not switched, it also added the concept of a train. The train is this new concept we see in the game with different mechanics depending on the scenario you're playing as. Something you have to jump on, something you have to shoot from, something that's going to be running over zombies as it comes. It added a new concept that I'm still disappointed that they didn't offer a giant, like we have giant Galactus and you couldn't give us a plastic train. I would have paid for it. I'm okay with that. I want a plastic train for my table. It's a little frustrating that they didn't have that. It added a few other things, including changing the zombie spawn rules and removing doors entirely. There are no longer doors in Zombicide Undead or Alive, and the way the zombies spawn are slightly different. Survivors also come with a class, something we saw introduced in Invader. We now have classes for your zombies that all come with a starting skill. Depending on the class you are, you have some way that you're different, from shooting weapons, from re-rolling your shots, from having, more health, from different concepts you have in the game. Each zombie comes with a class that changes the way they play. It also added a version of siege engines that we had seen from Green Horde. You have these little machine guns you can be moving along on a cart and using as you need. It also streamlined the noise system of Zombicide, reducing the amount of noise tokens from just hordes of noise tokens to a single most recent noise effect. The idea that zombies are attracted to the most recent noise as opposed to the most noise, which is an interesting tactical strategy, as well as making it a little more streamlined, not having to manage as many tokens on the table, and having to worry about the fact that you inevitably will be missing tokens. So Zombicide Undead or Alive did a bunch of things, which I just covered, but most importantly to me, I actually lost it when playing. That is the biggest reason why I think Zombicide Undead or Alive has a chance of sticking around in my collection. And I say a chance because Black Plague has still been my favorite Zombicide. From my one game of Undead or Alive, and granted I need more plays, but from my single game of Undead or Alive, I enjoyed it, I wanted it, I backed it, I liked the theme, I liked the differences, I like all that, but I still think that I prefer Black Plague, and even if only, first of all, thematically I prefer Black Plague. Second of all, is one area where Undead or Alive did not improve things for me, is it didn't increase the types of zombies out there. We still saw that reduction we saw in 2nd edition, where we no longer have the zombie variety, and instead we have these daily spawns with just tons of rules with not enough impact. We saw that continuation in Undead or Alive, and it's one of the reasons that I'm a little skeptical. Not that it won't be fun, I think it will be fun, and I think if you want that theme, that's a big deal. But if you're someone like me who wants the zombie variety and the daily spawn is not nearly as intriguing, I think Undead or Alive might not offer you that concept. They did have some variety, they had some changes. They also added this concept of riders on horseback, on survivors on horseback. They added some interesting things, for sure. They had a steampunk expansion, they had a campaign. I will be diving into Undead or Alive, make no mistake about it. I think, like Invader, it will probably sit around in my collection for a few years with me constantly wrestling with myself whether I should or shouldn't get rid of it. Not because I don't like it, because I like other games better. And then, like Invader, I think eventually it will leave. What's going to be the trigger for it to leave? I don't know. Maybe another Zombicide. It seems to be there's going to be one every year. I'm still waiting for Pirate Zombicide, so we'll see. But either way, that's Undead or Alive. And then from there, we have Marvel Zombies. As of the time of filming, 2022, it's the newest one. We have 17,500 backers as of now. It will definitely surpass Undead or Alive, which means it will definitely surpass 2nd edition. It will almost certainly not surpass Green Horde in terms of the number of backers. 27,000 backers is a milestone to beat. But it will surpass Green Horde in amounts of funding. And that's because of the fact that you have two different Zombicide games, you have the Marvel, you have the Galactus, you have all the reasons why this is bound to be a very expensive campaign. Currently at 4.6 million as of now, and as of right now it's on track to hit somewhere between 8 and 11 million depending how the rest of the campaign goes. That is a big range. Could go higher than 11 million, I don't think so. Could go lower than 8 million, I also do not think so. Zombicide Marvel, or Marvel Zombies, is a bigger reworking than most of the other changes we've seen in Zombicide to date, at least in my opinion. And I have played Marvel Zombies multiple times, and I will be diving into it multiple times more, hopefully before the campaign ends, we shall see. But Marvel Zombies offers a few things. First of all, doors are back. We now have doors again. In fact, more than that, we actually have windows you can crash through as well. It also obviously layers on the Marvel IP, so if you like the Marvel IP, well, that's obviously a plus in that category. It adds a few other things. It has 4 survivors instead of 6, so we're still keeping that from Undead or Alive. It has 2 entirely different modes to the game. We have 2 different systems with cross-compatibility between the systems, left, right, and center. 2 different modes. One where you're playing as zombie heroes, and you're basically trying to take out the shield agents, and it has a hunger mechanic instead, as you're ravenous and try to survive, and this hunger mechanic forces you into making decisions that you don't want to make, because you have to occasionally devour enemies, because if you don't, Your hunger is going to be overpowering you, and you will be forced to only choose between moving and devouring, which, trust me from playing it, will cripple your decision tree of what you are able to do. So you have to keep your hunger in check as you play through the game. Adds a few other mechanics such as damage. If you're too ravenous, you will be taking damage every single turn. As well as that, adds some other changes we'll get to in a second, because first I want to talk about the power mechanic. Because the other zombie system is where you're playing as the heroes, and instead there's a power mechanic going on in the game instead. This is instead of managing your hunger, you're managing your power. Although you want your power to go up so you can use it and spend it to augment your abilities in the game and to give you more stuff you can do. So a lot of the things will be modified by your power, which gives you a lot of freedom to have these epic, amazing turns. You can spend actions to increase your power. So there's a lot of resource manipulation, resource planning in the game systems. Those are going to be the two primary differences between the two modes, but then past that, the games inherently offer some other things. We're no longer searching for equipment. Instead, you are going to be finding these power-ups, these skills, I can't remember what they're called, but you're going to be finding these notable feats, so to speak. So you're a hero. You're not searching for an Uzi. Rather, on the other hand, you will find this, heroic feat that allows you to do something else more powerful, although it's one-time use. It's not equipment that sticks around. They are actions you can take to gather these heroic feats and then utilize them when it's beneficial to do so. You also have bystanders. Depending on the mode you're playing, you're either eating those bystanders to gain permanent powers. Unlike the heroic feats, the bystander things are going to be permanent, although if you eat another bystander, then you replace it. So only one at a time, though. And then similarly, if you're playing as the heroes, you are saving the bystanders. And one of those differences means that when you're eating bystanders, they're going to be on the board the entire time until you eat them or die trying. Whereas when you're playing as the heroes, the other enemies are going to be trying to take down those bystanders, and you'll have to play, again, a bit of a resource game of trying to figure out how you can actually save the bystanders in time, which is tough and hard, and yeah. You're going to maintain the aspect of focus fire from Invader, although leaning even more heavily into it. You're going to have abominations, heroes that take 5 hits to kill. And so yes, focus fire I found too easy. You know when focus fire is not too easy? When there's, first of all, when there's tons of abominations left, right, and center in the form of heroes you're fighting against. Zombie Doctor Strange trying to tackle heroic Spider-Man. Those are conversations we can have about the threat level of heroes. When you have Thor in your face and you have to get 5 hits to kill Thor, these are conversations, these are changes, these are rules that I can get behind. The difficulty is absolutely there. From my games of Marvel Zombies, we have either died, like Lost, or almost died. Both of those are acceptable to me. Those are the only 2 acceptable methods of playing a Zombicide game to me. Either dying or almost dying. I don't like anything else. Past that, focus fire we talked about. Noise tokens. Noise tokens are entirely gone. There's no equipment. Then the custom skills. We switched the skill tree system. Instead of having a variety, just like a package of 50 skills that all the heroes are sharing between them in different configurations as you level up your heroes and choose different pathways down of what you want, instead Marvel Zombies leans into each hero having a unique set of skills. So there's a lot more variety there. You're also no longer flipping through the back of the rulebook to figure out what Ironhide Zombies is, because you have them all printed on your dashboard. The downside is you get the increased customization per hero, you get the no longer flipping through the rulebook. The flip side is you do not have the custom skill tree. You don't have a pathway that you can augment up. You are simply going down a linear path. I unlock this skill, then this skill, then this skill. That may or may not be enough variety for you, although given if you are back in this game and the amount of stretch goals you'll get, and the fact that every single character you have effectively is twice the gameplay if you're getting both systems. Because every character you have, if you get a new unlock, whatever, we just got Doctor Strange today, Zombie Doctor Strange. Well, you can play as Zombie Doctor Strange in zombie mode, or you can play against Zombie Doctor Strange in heroic mode. So every single character offers 2 ways that they are going to impact your game. Every unlock we get is 2 things. It's both a survivor and an abomination at the same time, giving you twice the gameplay and a lot of ways to cross-pollinate the systems. The areas that I would want to see more from Marvel Zombies, because as much as Marvel Zombies is my favorite system so far, and I'll tell you why in a second, there are still areas where I want to see more from Marvel Zombies. First of all, we still haven't seen zombie variety. It bothers me a little bit less than in other systems because the abominations, the heroes you're fighting against, are more frequent. You're seeing enough of them that they present their own constant variety to the gameplay. And again, if you have just hordes and hordes of them, you're going to see a lot of variety from the way the abominations affect things. Think of it as the daily spawn, except they actually are far, far more meaningful. I also do wish that we had that customized skill tree. I'm happier with the system we have now than the past system. I'm happier with every hero having just tons of variety. So no matter who I'm playing, it definitely feels like a different character, as opposed to having, 4 skills overlapping between 1 or 2 different characters. But I still would love to see the development of the skill tree in some option. I mean, they can't have everything though, so I'm reluctantly fine with what we have. As far as why Marvel Zombies is my favorite system, and hopefully by now, through this way too long video, you have found enough reasons why one system speaks to you more than the other. whether thematically, whether mechanically, whether variety, all the different systems being something new to the table. In my opinion, based on what I like, for me, it's currently Marvel Zombies, then Black Plague, which I combine with Green Horde, then Undead or Alive, and the other ones I don't think are close enough to compare. Those are the three for me. And the reason those are the three for me is because the first challenge for me is the difficulty. I want these games to be difficult, so the ones that make it feel punishing, the ones that make me feel like I have a chance of winning, but that I often lose and often die, those are the systems that I start off by liking. Secondly, I like variety. Ideally in the form of multiple zombie types, but I'll take it if there's enough abominations or heroes or things that change up the experience. I just don't want the games to feel similar across multiple plays. Between the campaigns, between the scenarios, between the options on the table and the different scenarios you're given, all those things have different ways of mitigating or modifying the variability, but those are all factors as well. Also, Marvel Zombies brings back fully the concept of opening a door and having zombies spawn. Something I always appreciated from Black Plague, and something I very much missed in Invader, and while Undead or Alive has it, doesn't have it to the same degree. But again, I do like Undead or Alive. I like the idea of having that aspect of opening a door and having things blow up in your face. If you've watched the gameplay, you know why. I like opening those doors, I like watching the world fall apart, I like us desperately trying to figure out what we need to do to salvage it. I like the difficulty of the systems. IP-wise, Marvel is going to be my favorite IP of the group, and so I appreciate that aspect. And also, it does represent the biggest changes to the system until now. The game feels like it has the core mechanic at play, but it feels like there's a lot of changes. Are they small? Potentially. Are they surface level? Potentially. But it feels more different than the other changes I have played in the systems until now, and so it feels like a fresher take on the Zombicide system. I like a lot of the changes they're making. I like the variety. I like the 4 heroes. I like what you've seen already before, to be fair. I like the concept of the saving the bystanders or eating the bystanders. Now, I do prefer hero mode, by the way. One of the reasons I prefer hero mode is I like the resource manipulation of your power over the slow escalation of your hunger. The slow escalation of your hunger results in you having to occasionally devour things, which is as a tactical choice, but I far more appreciated the leveling up of your power to have a more powerful action. When you devour something, you're almost taking a weaker action than a regular attack. When you use your power, you're taking a more powerful action, so I like the game balance there. I also like the fact that in the hero mode, your bystanders, you can lose them. You can lose those bystanders. They can be eaten by zombies, and you have to manage that aspect. You have to keep them alive, or you will lose them to the game. That offers another tactical choice of where you go, what you do next, of how you progress through the system. And then, I don't know if one system is inherently more difficult than the other. I found heroic mode to be a little more difficult so far, which is one of my preferences for it. But that, effectively, in 40 minutes or so, roughly 40 minutes, is why I prefer Marvel Zombies, what aspects of Marvel Zombies I prefer, why I prefer the heroic mode of Marvel Zombies, and a full history of the entire Zombicide franchise until now, minus expansions. I didn't want to go into every single little expansion, but that's it. I am all in on Marvel Zombies. I'm keeping Black Plague, and I'm looking forward to Undead or Alive. For me, the rest of them are good, but not to the level of those 3. Hope you found this video in some way helpful, some way enjoyable. Way too much Zombicide to cover. I was supposed to go eat dinner 20 minutes ago, but I did this video instead. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.